Good morning, everyone. We are the Group 2, and we are going to be presenting the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
So, what is the ICCPR? The ICCPR, or the United Nations International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, is a multilateral, meaning involves multiple countries, treaty adopted by the UN General Assembly that attempts to ensure the protection and preservation of civil and political rights. It is one of the documents/treaties that make up the International Bill of Human Rights. The International Bill of Rights is basically forms the basis for all international human rights law and is composed of various different covenants between countries over the years. This involves the said International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
As for its brief history, the ICCPR attempts to ensure the protection of civil and political rights. So it was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 19, 1966, with 74 signatories, and it came into force on March 23, 1976. As of September 2019, the Covenant has 173 parties and 6 more signatories without ratification. Holdouts are People's Republic of China and Cuba, while North Korea tried to withdraw. Moreover, according to a World Health Organization handout, even before the adoption of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in 1948, wide agreement existed that the rights which were to be enshrined in the declaration were to be transformed into legally binding obligations through the negotiation of one or more treaties. In 1966, two separate treaties covering almost entirely all the rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were adopted after approximately 20 years of negotiation, one for civil and political rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and one for economic, social, and cultural rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. Together, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the ICCPR, and the ICESCR are sometimes referred to as the International Bill of Human Rights. Now, what rights are protected by the ICCPR? So the ICCPR aims to protect and preserve an individual's civil and political rights. So, it necessitates that countries that have ratified the treaty to protect and preserve basic human rights, such as guarantees of equal social opportunities and equal protection under the law, regardless of race, religion, or other personal characteristics, and participation in the establishment or administration of a government. They are all protected under the ICCPR.
As you can see in the slide, we've put out a summary of the specific rights that are covered for each article from the Covenant. However, because of time, we won't be able to elaborate on every single one. But by simply skimming through, it is very clear, that these articles encompass both the civil and the political rights of a human being. Take, for example, we have Article 14, equality before the courts and tribunals, right to a fair trial, and then we have, for example, Article 25, the right to political participation. That is a political right. Let us now move on to talk about the specific issues that are addressed by the ICCPR. Obviously, since this covenant is all about civil and political rights, the main issues that it is addressing are violations to these rights. Issues that I am very positive we all have encountered at some point. It's on the news, on social media, it is current events, issues all around the world. For example, police brutality. It is the excessive and unwarranted use of force by law enforcement, and unfortunately, it is a very rampant civil rights violation that happens everywhere. The next issue kind of ties into police brutality in that in most cases, or most victims per se of police brutality, are black people, people of color, or just minorities in general. Case in point, the infamous case of George Floyd that started the whole Black Lives Matter movement in the US. It's very clear that systemic racism and colorism still lives and breathes to this day, and that is part of what the ICCPR is addressing in this covenant. Moving on, red tagging. It's another issue addressed by this covenant. As I'm sure we all know, red tagging happens when individuals who express their dissent for their government are labeled as terrorists or communists or people who are a danger to society. Because of this, people are forced to keep quiet with their opinions in fear for their lives and safety, and this is essentially a violation of the covenant, because what it does is it impinges on our right to free expression. The discrimination of someone based on their sex or gender is also an issue that this covenant seeks to address, implied specifically under Article 16 and 26. This also ties into several gender or sex rooted issues, such as violence against women, harassment amongst women, inadequate representation for women in government positions, and the list goes on. And that concludes our report on the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Here are our sources, and thank you very much for listening.